Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the Improvement Podcast. So in this episode today, I'm going to touch on our Q&A episode. So thank you very much for everyone that submitted their questions. I'll get round to as much questions as I possibly can. Any questions that I don't answer, I will keep and I'll cover them in the next Q&A episode. And I'm looking to do these round about every 10 episodes. So to start off, the first question that I got was, "What's the hardest part of prep?" The individual asked, "Is it kind of the hunger aspect? Is it potentially maybe the fatigue associated with it?" So personally, I don't mind having the quite a lot of structure. I don't mind the routine. I don't mind doing the same thing day to day. That's not a problem for me. The hard part of it, there's a few. One of it is just like the fatigue associated with it. So like when you're getting really, really lean at the end of prep, even doing simple tasks are quite difficult. Thinking about having to pick something off the ground, you're just like, ugh, you just got no energy. You're extremely fatigued, so that's quite a hard aspect. And obviously, it's fine, like just lying in bed when you feel like that, but it's about carrying out your day to day tasks, still holding yourself to the high standard, still training with the same level of intensity and effort, although you feel battered. That's kind of the hard part associated with it, I'd say. So that's probably one of them. Also, it's a hard process, not just for yourself, but for individuals around you. So it can be quite, what's the word? It's a big sacrifice for individuals around you. So having that kind of guilt and having that pressure on your shoulders, like knowing that for your girlfriend you're not going out for food for a good X amount of weeks, you're not yourself, you're you're just really tunnel visioned and focused, and as a result you're not yourself. You're a bit different when you're that lean. So, but of course, that's like the later stages of prep. It's not like that from day one. It's the later end where you will have some of those negative effects, where you have some of those negative experiences. But apart from that, although it's got its difficulties, like I absolutely love the process and I wouldn't change it for the world. It's not something I definitely want to do every year just because I want to make improvements. If you diet down every year and compete, you'll probably look the same because it takes a while to get your strength back and recover from it. So I'd say the fatigue associated with it and the somewhat guilt that you have, but I think the fact that I got like quite a good return for an investment, winning the world finals, uh, becoming Scottish champion as well, it kind of made it all worth it. So, and also like it's helped massively. Not that it's a prime focus or prime reason, but it helped massively with my business as well, which is obviously like another positive. So you can kind of see the return for your investment there. Obviously, the hunger can be quite difficult, and that's a challenge itself. Doing the cardio, sometimes you're not up for it, but it is more so the fatigue associated with it more than the hunger itself, because you kind of get used to the hunger, you get used to kind of the low food, but the duration as well can be quite brutal because competed and prepped from February to I think October, so it's a long time to spend dieting. So it takes its toll on you from like a mental standpoint. So the next question I got was what started my love for bodybuilding. So I've always been into sports from quite a young age, and originally I got into the gym just to help my judo, to help my performance there and to get stronger. And then I just started enjoying the gym like a fair bit and somewhat more than doing judo. And when like I've done judo for a good 10 years, and sometimes when you do a sport or endeavor, like you don't think, you just do it because that's what you do. That's what you do as an individual. So I think the fact that I'd done judo for so long, I just kept doing it because that's what I'd done. That's what my day to day routine looked like. But then like my love for it just dwindled and I started loving the gym more, and I was thinking like why am I still doing it? Like it's not the most fruitful endeavor regarding getting really wealthy through judo, etc. And so there wasn't much return for investment. It's not like I was a football player making millions, so I was like, oh, it's worth sticking with it. So I just transitioned my efforts into training in the gym really because I was enjoying that more. It's not like I was stopping it to sit on my bum. I know my dad was quite hesitant about me stopping because he obviously supported me from the start, and he he obviously wouldn't want me to give up something that I've been doing for so long and got quite far in and done somewhat okay at. And as a result, he was quite hesitant. But I'm definitely confident that I made the right decision regarding stopping judo when I did, and I'm really really glad I did for that reason. And the next question is like, what's kept me tunnel visioned throughout my fitness journey? So to be fair, it's not been hard. Like I've got goals, so and I want to reach those goals. So my actions are in line with them as a result of that. Obviously, at times things can get difficult. You're not always going to be motivated to train, but I think doing judo from such a young age, it instilled that discipline into me because I was training multiple times a week. I was watching my nutrition. I was dieting down to make certain weight classes in judo. So it was almost like a those positive habits were kind of already instilled with me in terms of dealing with delayed gratification, being really disciplined, sort of thing. So when I do have the periods where I'm not that motivated, I don't really let it influence things because in any aspect of life, like if you just show up or just tick your boxes when you do feel like doing certain tasks, then your progress will reflect that, and you'll sadly not make much progress. So it's just a case of just sticking with it when maybe your motivation does dwindle. But what I think helps in terms of just to give some value, not just say be disciplined, is having like wee short term goals you're working towards. So right now I'm competing again in 2028. That's miles away. So it's hard to maybe for some individuals stay focused and know that they're working towards that long term goal. So instead, I'll set myself short term goals. So the reason I got into the gym and love the bodybuilding is I love the day to day progression when it comes to being in the gym. I just love the process of going in, being a bit better than last time, and having that satisfaction from knowing you've improved. It's very tangible and it's very easy to see if you're improving or not because your lifts tell you, your logbook tells you in the gym. So I rely on that for a great sense of enjoyment. I love knowing, right, I've got that additional rep and that I've been better than last time. Simple as that. So just kind of relating those short term wee wins you get on a daily basis, and just the short term wins of ticking your boxes every single day and relating that back to your long term goal, I think it helps massively. So that's what I personally do because you know if you are putting load on your lifts with the same form, that's going to equate to new muscle tissue, and as a result, making improvements in your physique. So that's what helps me, just partly an enjoyment aspect, highlighting those mini wins and giving myself performance goals to work towards. Like right now, I'm chasing down 4 plates on a deficit stiff like deadlift, the true squat, which is a squat machine I'm looking to get 6 plates on. So I've always got these numbers in my head that I know I'm working towards, and also making sure, like, although you are working towards those long term wins, making sure you are somewhat being present and you are not just thinking about the future because it's easy to always be thinking about what's next, and then it gets you away from actually enjoying the present moment. So just having that gratitude and knowing that you get to do what you want to do on a daily basis and highlighting those mini wins daily, I think helps. So the next question an individual asked, if they're doing something like a leg extension and towards the end of the set, like they're just getting very, very slightly less range, when would you when would you not kind of call it a full rep? When would you not call it like a full rep and you'd call it maybe a partial or a half rep? If they're getting, let's say, 5% less contraction at the top, like they're just very, very close to kind of shortening their quad or fully locking out the movement. And I wouldn't lose sleep over this too much. When you do any movement like a pull down, when you do a row, when you do a leg extension, when you do a hamstring curl, pressing not so much because you kind of know when you lock it out and it gets lighter at the top usually. But when you do any one of these kind of movements I've just discussed, same with maybe a lateral raise if you keep your form accurate, depending on the movement, of course, you're never going to get the last rep quite as short as your first, and that's fine, even if it's quote unquote a full rep. And the reason being is we're weaker in the shortened position, especially as the set goes on. Our ability to shorten a muscle or fully lock out, let's say a leg extension, or to get your elbows all the way back during a like a row variation or pull down is going to be diminished. And I wouldn't lose sleep over this too much. Like if it's to the point where you really need to look at the video, if you took a form clip and really need to kind of look side by side to see was this quite short enough, it was probably short enough. If you look at it and it's very noticeable and apparent, then you then know it's not a rep. So that's how I'd kind of go about counting it, because again, as long as it's standardized as well, like if you do a row, your last rep on a row or a pull down, granted you're not using momentum, you're never going to get your upper arm fully back, which is fine, as long as that's the same weekly, because it will be the same weekly if you're training to that failure point. So then it is standardized form. So although your form's not necessarily you're getting as much range that last rep, if every single week you're not getting as much range that last rep, it's still comparable. So I wouldn't lose sleep over it at all, for that reason. And that's how I'd go about kind of tracking it. If like I look at it and I think, right, that's very far off a full rep, like my upper arm's not in line with my torso during a row, or if it's very like far from not being locked out, I wouldn't class it as a full rep. But if you've got 95% there, it's nothing to really lose sleep over at all. And an individual asks as well, like if a gym doesn't have like a good seated hamstring curl, what but they've got like a single leg standing one or a kneeling one, would that be a good substitute? So yeah, when it comes to like a seated hamstring curl, part of the benefit of like a seated ham in comparison to maybe a standing hamstring curl, a lying hamstring curl, is you get to lengthen your hamstring more. So your hamstring basically crosses over the hip joint, which basically means your length or the position of your hip, the angle of your hip, if you're in more hip flexion, if you're more bent at the hip, will mean you're lengthening your hamstring further. So on paper, you could say a hamstring curl which is seated is a more favourable option for that reason. Research papers indicate that when individuals perform like a seated versus a lying hamstring curl, they get more growth when they're doing the seated hamstring curl because they're training the muscle at a longer length. So here you could take that and not look into it further and think, oh, that means I must do a seated hamstring curl, a lying hamstring curl is useless. However, what maybe research papers don't take into consideration, is they think very two-dimensional, meaning they don't consider, right, what other movements has that individual got in their program. If let's say an individual for that session is only performing a hamstring curl, maybe you want to do like a seated instead of a lying, or maybe if they're doing one hamstring movement, yes, you'd maybe want to opt for a seated one. But are you doing like a straight leg deadlift? Are you doing a Romanian deadlift? Are you doing another exercise to complement that also lengthens the hamstring? If so, I don't think it's the end of the world doing something where you're not getting quite as much stretch in your hamstring, for that reason. Like, because again, like that's a problem with research. Research will point out, oh, this is superior to that, this is better than this, but they don't consider a lot of other variables. For example, a lot of research is talking about length and partials being superior for muscle growth or equal muscle growth. And then you get research that indicates all low rep work isn't as fatiguing as high rep work. But what if someone's injured? Then maybe them shortening a muscle is going to reduce load exposure. It's going to get more blood in there. It's going to mean it feels just safer and more effective on paper, and just less injury risk associated with it. So, like you want to think over the long term, and over the long term, yes, low rep work might be better for muscle growth, might be less fatiguing. Length and partials might give you maybe just as much results, but how can you measure progress when you're doing a length and partial? It's not as easy to, and again, we want to stay injury free, and sometimes what's optimal on paper won't always keep us injury free, but what is optimal is obviously not getting injured and being safe during your training, and being pain free long term, because you can at the end of the day progress if you're injured. And the next question is, someone asked if they're doing like a upper back, or they feel their upper back and traps being kind of pumped, or in other words worked. A pump is basically when you get like blood pulled to the target muscle when you're training a muscle group. So if you're doing like a lateral raise and you're getting quite a pump in your upper back or traps, you will somewhat get 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 some stimulation in that area. The reason being is part of the traps role is to stabilize the shoulder joint, and you can't remove your traps involvement when you're doing a lateral raise. You can try and minimize it, and you want to minimize it so you're actually biasing the traps, but it's not the end of the world getting a bit of trap involvement, because it just means you'll grow a set of meaty traps while also growing your side delts, your shoulders. So due to their role of stabilizing the shoulder, you will get some involvement. The trap's role, or part of its role, is to elevate the shoulder joint, so to shrug up. So what I'd do is when you're performing it, I would think about driving your hand down and out to initiate the movement instead of thinking up or out alone, and that's going to make you more likely to keep the shoulder depressed or down and not have excessive trap involvement. And what I find as well is with the standing position, what I'd recommend you do is when you're trying to train your side delt, try and think about driving the upper arm not just out but forward slightly, and that will put you in the sagittal plane instead of the frontal plane. In other words, put you in an arm path which is maybe more favourable to target the side delts instead of the traps. So what that would look like is standing quite close to the cable and just thinking like you're doing a dumbbell lateral raise instead of just thinking out directly. So thinking out and forward while keeping your palm down and internally rotated at the shoulder as a result. In other words, like you're pouring like a glass of water or like a jug of some sort really. Or thinking pinky up can be another good cue, so you keep it on the side delt for that reason. And next question is how sloppy is too sloppy when you are performing like a bent over barbell row. So a bent over barbell row is one of the exceptions where I think momentum can have a bit of its place, because going back to muscles grow longer or better at longer muscle lengths. As a result of that, if you're doing like a bent over row and you are performing it with absolutely perfect form, you've got zero movement in your hips, everything's completely still, then you're going to fail very early and you're not going to be able to get a lot of range of motion because it's very heavy at the top. So it can allow you to extend the set further. And as for how do you know if it's too sloppy or not? How does it feel? See, after you get out of the set, do you feel like, and again, what's your target muscle? So if someone's trying to target just their upper back, then maybe they want it a bit more strict so they're not using as much of their lower back. If someone's squatting the next day, they might want to keep it even stricter so that they're not getting any stress on their lower back once again, because they want their lower back to be fresh for their squats their following day. So there are a few things you can consider. So yeah, once you finish your set, how does it feel? If it feels like you're in pain, you've got nothing out of it, then you've probably used too much momentum. If you feel like, right, I've got some blood in my upper back, my lower back feels worked as well, that felt safe, it felt like I had good control over it, and then looking at your form, did you get the upper arm quite far back in line with your torso? Did you remain relatively bent over throughout? If so, then you're probably in a good spot in regards to your form. Whereas if the answer to those questions is no, it was too sloppy, it didn't feel great, the form clip didn't look good, then maybe it is too sloppy. But how does it feel? Like, I think something that people don't do because there's a lot of information out there is they don't listen to their body. Because back in the day, you don't have any research you can look at. You didn't have any people you could ask questions for online. So you went by intuition. You went by what felt good. And then bodybuilders have done that for years, and it has answered a few questions, and they have basically found out through trial and error, which research has now backed up, that they have been doing things somewhat effectively. Like some individuals have, like when dumbbell press, and they using the intuition, they've done kind of lengthened partials. When they do like a dumbbell press, they don't go all the way up to the top because there's no tension there. So we things like that, like bodybuilders have just found out through trial and error, and things like using a great stretch, like bodybuilders have done for years. Like Arnold's was, I believe, quite big in that. Obviously, he didn't do everything right, but there you can see, like, listen to your body, what feels good for yourself, because evidence, or I think it's good being evidence based instead of research based, meaning evidence is not just what's on a research paper, evidence is what's produced your results, what feels good, what have you got evidence doing, which doesn't need to be a paper with some guy in a white coat who's brung out to back up your claim or your decision making, but instead think, what do you feel is appropriate based on your experience, based on what you feel works for yourself. And the last question of the day I'm going to be going over is high rep sets on compound movements like a leg press, hack squat underutilized in my opinion? So what again is most important is staying injury free. So regardless if a high rep range is optimal or not, then that will obviously influence things. Like what I mean by that is if you are injured, you're not going to be able to progress well. So it doesn't really matter again if it is optimal doing a high rep range or a low rep range. If you're or yeah, if you can't train because you're injured, then it doesn't matter if your rep range is not effective or not. What matters most is being injury free. However, I do think there's some merit in using high rep work for a few reasons. It means you're not putting all your eggs in one basket when it comes to muscle growth, meaning if there is some potential benefit in high rep work when it comes to getting a pump, which could potentially promote muscle growth, and as a result, it could be beneficial to use. Second of all, like I said, staying injury free so you're not battering your joints with low rep work all the time. Free, some individuals will struggle to maintain good form when they're doing a super low rep range. So for them, a high rep range can be beneficial. And also pain tolerance. So high rep works hard. If you can get good at doing 20 to 30 reps on a leg press, then your ability to then take lower rep sets to failure, especially on easier exercises, it's going to be very, very good. So I think that's another benefit of it as well. And also, rep ranges stall, and sometimes you don't always have access to another good alternative in terms of equipment. So in this case, instead of swapping for, let's say, if you're doing a leg press, you've only got one leg press. Instead of swapping that for some exercise that on paper is not that effective or productive, you could instead swap it, or you could just adjust the rep range accordingly, which could be a bit of a better option, because it's better doing a maybe changing the rep range and keeping the movement the same or manipulating the tempo instead of swapping for a pure movement just for the sake of variation. So yeah, that's my kind of thoughts on if high. Oh, I've not really answered the question. So do I think they're underutilized? I don't know what everyone's programming looks like, so I can't really say to be fair. But I think using a multitude of rep ranges isn't a bad idea. And generally, when leg pressing, it does feel better in a high rep range anecdotally, and it just does feel a bit more joint friendly. So I like using like a multitude of rep ranges. With my leg pressing now, I'm working it in a bit of a high rep range because the previous movement there, I've done like a squat variation which I do quite a low rep range in, so it makes sense again, so I'm not putting all my eggs in one basket. And also if you are doing like a higher rep set, you can get more effective reps because once you get to failure you can rest at the top a bit more, do more reps, rest at the top, do more reps. Whereas when you're doing like a 5 rep set, it's hard to really extend that set out further and get more effective reps. So that's another potential benefit of it. So thank you very much for everyone watching or listening. Any story tags is massively appreciated, so share it on Instagram if you've enjoyed it. Leave a rating and review and a like. If you want any topics covered or you've got any questions for the next Q&A episode, drop them in the comments on YouTube or message me directly and I'll be sure to put them on the list so I get round to covering them. And thank you very much everyone for watching.